31 miles east of central London, United Kingdom, lies a lonely stretch of road called Workhouse Lane, a secluded farm track. It's here that one of the UK's bloodiest gangland killings took place. If you follow UK true crime, this story is one that always seems to resurface in the news for one reason or another. In 1995, 3 men went down that road and never came back. They were led by Tony Tucker, and this is his story. If you enjoy true gangster stories, odds are you want to subscribe to our channel. On the evening of December 6th, 1995, a group of men arrived at a secluded farm track in Rettendon, Essex. Leading them was Tony Tucker, a nightclub security operator with ties to the local drug trade. He wasn't alone. His associates Pat Tate and Craig Rolfe were with him. They were a part of the gang called the Essex Boys. By the next morning, all 3 would be found dead, slumped in their Range Rover, each shot at close range. This gangland hit went on to be dubbed the Rettendon Murders, covered in many movies and books. The investigation into the murders went on for years. Eventually, a breakthrough came when a police informant, Darren Nichols, came forward, claiming to have been the getaway driver on that deadly night. His testimony led to the convictions of Michael Steele and Jack Holmes in 1998. But even after the verdict was read, there were still lots of doubts lingering, with some people doubting the reliability of Nichols' accounts, especially given his own criminal background and the lack of significant forensic evidence. Others pointed to inconsistencies in the timeline. To this day, some believe the true story remains buried. Little is known about Tony Tucker's early life, but what is known is that from a young age, he aspired to be a tough guy, someone who could hold his own in a fight and command fear. With a taste for expensive things, Tucker strove to get what he wanted in life, even if that meant acquiring it through illegal means. As the leader of the Essex Boys, a drug-dealing gang that operated throughout Essex during the 1990s, Anthony Tony Tucker was a feared figure in the criminal underworld. He ran a security business providing personnel for clubs around Essex, a venture that brought him into contact with boxer Nigel Benn, a bodybuilder who regularly frequented the gym. Tucker began acting as a bodyguard for Ben, alongside minder David Rolex Dave King. This role offered Tucker opportunities to meet other celebrities, aiding the expansion of his business. He was often seen ringside during Ben's fights as part of his entourage. Pat Tate, another notoriously violent figure from Essex, had a long history of drug offenses and robbery, enough to land him behind bars more than once. Despite their rough reputations, there was a real respect between him and Tucker. While Tate served time, Tucker kept an eye on his second-hand car dealership, making sure it stayed afloat. It wasn't just business, though. It was loyalty. And when Tate finally got out, Tucker brought him straight into his growing drug operation, offering him a job, and maybe, in a way, something to anchor him. Tate, with his towering frame and explosive temper, quickly became a key player, using his sheer size to enforce Tucker's empire. Then there was Craig Rolfe, a small-time criminal who struggled with a serious cocaine habit. Rolfe took on the role of driver and enforcer, always ready to act as backup when things got messy. Also circling around the operation was Carlton Leach, a former football hooligan once tied to the infamous Intercity firm. Leach had a foot firmly planted in Essex's nightclub scene, bouncing doors during the late 80s rave explosion. His connections in the ecstasy scene made him a natural ally for the crew's expanding drug business. Though, to be honest, it's hard to say how much he really trusted any of them. It was really the partnership between Tony Tucker and Pat Tate that locked down the Essex drug trade. Together, they were enough to crush almost any resistance. Few even dared to step out of line, and the ones who did didn't last long. Their power wasn't just built on reputation either. They made sure of it with brutal beatings, and when that didn't send the right message, they didn't hesitate to use torture. The rules were simple enough. Cross them, and you paid for it. The flow of drugs into Essex's nightclub scene made the Essex Boys hundreds of thousands in dirty money. A lot of it went straight into funding the high-end lifestyles of Tucker, Tate, Rolfe, and Leach. Sure, Tucker officially earned about 1,500 pounds a week through his security business, but it was the drug money that fueled the real luxury. By the time of his death, he was living in a 250,000-pound house and cruising around in expensive cars. But the booming ecstasy trade came at a heavy cost. Just a month before the Essex Boys were gunned down, tragedy struck. On November 11th, 1995, Leah Betts, a schoolgirl from Lettendon, collapsed into a coma after taking ecstasy at a party. She never woke up. Just hours before Leah Betts collapsed, the 18-year-old had taken an ecstasy, MDMA tablet, and then consumed approximately 7 liters of water within a 90-minute period. 5 days later, she died after her life support machine was switched off. Although 4 of her friends who had been present were arrested, no one was ever charged with supplying the deadly drug. Her death became a stark symbol in the British media of the dangers of illegal drugs, particularly ecstasy. In response, Essex police launched a significant inquiry to identify the suppliers of the tablet Leah had taken. Leah had purchased the tablet from Raquel's Club, a Basildon nightclub where Tucker's gang allegedly controlled the supply of ecstasy. The murder of Tony Tucker and the Essex Boys. On the morning of December 7th, 1995, 2 men stumbled across what looked like an abandoned Range Rover, parked in front of a locked gate leading to an angler's carp pond near the shooting range on farmer Ken Jiggins's land. In the quiet village of Rettendon, it was a cold, frosty morning, the kind that leaves everything glazed in white, but strangely, the vehicle's windshield was perfectly clear. When Jiggins and his friend, Peter Theobald, got closer, they spotted 2 men sitting up in the driver and passenger seats. At first, they assumed the men were just sleeping it off, but as they got nearer, they realized something was very wrong. Both men, and a third one in the back seat, were dead. The 2 quickly called the police, who arrived soon after to seal off the crime scene and preserve whatever evidence they could. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley was among the first senior officers on site. Identifying the bodies was the immediate priority. Each man had been shot twice in the head with what appeared to be a 12-bore pump-action shotgun. The passenger had taken a brutal blast to the side of the face. The driver, he'd been hit square in the back of the head, so violently that the lower half of his face was almost completely destroyed. The passenger was quickly identified as 38-year-old Tony Tucker. The driver was 26-year-old Craig Rolfe, and slumped in the back seat was 37-year-old Pat Tate, who, it turned out, had been shot once in the stomach before taking 2 blasts to the head. Police knew exactly who they were dealing with. All 3 men had reputations as local hard men, small-time gangsters with long rap sheets. They used brute force to keep people in line, trading on intimidation and fear. And they'd made plenty of enemies over the years. Honestly, to the police, it looked like a classic Gangland hit. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley summed it up bluntly. This is not an ordinary murder. It looks as if they were enticed down there. As far as murders go, you don't get any more serious than this. The killer, or killers, had fired off 8 shotgun rounds, leaving the spent shells scattered around the scene. Maybe it was too dark to bother picking them up. The precision of the killings made investigators think it might have been a professional job. 2 of the men died within seconds. Tate, sitting in the back, might have seen what was happening. maybe even tried to get away, but he didn't make it far. When news of the murders hit the press, there wasn't much public mourning. Aside from the families and a few friends, a lot of people seemed to think they got what they deserved. Boxer Nigel Benn, who had known Tucker for years, called it very tragic. But for most, sympathy was hard to come by. D.S. Dibley put it plainly: the public aren't too happy either about so much time being spent on such low life. But my job isn't to moralize. The killers have to be caught. He also admitted he was surprised there hadn't been any revenge attacks. At least, not yet. None of the families wanted to cooperate with police inquiries. Dibley figured they probably knew who was responsible, or at least had a pretty good idea, but were too scared to say anything. The list of suspects in the Rettendon Murders, as the killings of Tony Tucker and his associates became known, was long and messy. There was no shortage of people who might have wanted them dead. As the lead detective put it, this was not a whodunit, but a whodidn't. One early theory was that the murders were connected to the death of Leah Betts, some kind of brutal payback for the teenager's death. One man was arrested, a 27-year-old decorator from South London picked up during a joint operation with Scotland Yard. He ended up being charged with firearms offenses, but that was it. Detective Superintendent Dibley stayed optimistic, saying, "I'm happy with how our inquiry is proceeding, and I'm hopeful of arrests before I retire. It's how I would want to end a 32-year career." Another theory pointed towards the Adams crime family from North London. On January 1st, 1996, Essex police got a tip-off from a detective in Exeter CID. Apparently, one of his underworld contacts had some insight into why the three men were killed. According to the report, the contact said the Essex Boys had been shot because they owed the Adams firm £60,000. The tipster was described as a doorman, bodybuilder type, the kind of guy who moved easily in those circles. Still, it wasn't until May 1996 that a real break came. Three men, 52-year-old Michael Steele, 33-year-old Jack Hooms, and a third man were arrested during a police and customs operation targeting drug smuggling. Through patient, determined work, police managed to link them to the Essex Boys murders. Facing a murder charge, the third man, convicted fraudster Darren Nichols, started talking. He confessed his role to police, claiming he had met Steele, Hooms, and Tate years earlier while serving time for passing counterfeit cash at Halsley Bay Prison in Suffolk. After getting out, Nichols slid straight into Steele's smuggling crew, running trips back and forth to Amsterdam. While working for Steele and Hooms, Nichols would buy hundreds of kilos of cannabis, usually in Amsterdam, and drive it down to the Belgian coast. From there, he'd meet up with Steele's speedboat, and together they'd ferry the drugs across the channel to the Essex coastline. Once it hit the shore, the cannabis would be stashed and eventually distributed. At the center of all this was Mick Steele, a seasoned drug smuggler with a reputation for running slick operations. He eventually got tangled up with the Essex Boys. In November 1995, Steele supplied Tate, Tucker, and Rolfe with a batch of cannabis worth about 350,000 pounds on the street. But there was a problem. The quality was so bad that Steele agreed to take it back and refund a 70,000-pound deposit. The money got paid back, or at least it was supposed to be. Tate, however, claimed he never saw a penny, and to make matters worse, he refused to return a third of the cannabis haul. When Steele confronted him, Tate made him get on his knees and beg, then casually threatened to shoot him. There was already bad blood between the two. Steele had started seeing Tate's ex-girlfriend, which didn't exactly cool things down. Tate, furious, bragged to anyone who'd listen that he was going to kill Steele. Steele heard about it and decided he wasn't going to sit around waiting to get shot. Instead, he made the first move. Pretending to want to patch things up, Steele dangled the promise of a new, lucrative cocaine deal, something he was supposedly working on with his friend Jack Hooms. But the truth was, Steele wasn't offering Tate a new start. He was setting him up for a final exit. About 6 weeks before the murders, Steele reached out to Nichols and asked him to find a gun. Apparently Jack Hooms had a couple already, but they didn't want to use those for some reason. Nichols said he asked around but couldn't come up with anything. Meanwhile, Tate, Tucker, and Rolfe were invited to check out a farmer's field, supposedly the spot where a drug plane was going to land. According to Nichols, when Rolfe's Range Rover pulled up to the locked gate at the bottom of Workhouse Lane, Steele jumped out to open it. At that same moment, Jack Hooms leaned into the car window with a pump-action shotgun and opened fire on the 3 men inside. Seconds later, Nichols said he got a call from Hooms on his mobile, telling him to come pick them up. It was only when Steele and Hooms climbed into the back seat of his car, still spattered in blood, that Nichols realized just how far things had gone. During the drive home, Steele allegedly said, "They won't fuck with us again." Terrified he was now an accessory to murder, Nichols kept working for Steele for a while, selling drugs. But after Steele started making threats against him too, Nichols decided he'd had enough. He came forward and told police everything he knew. In late 1997, Steele and Hooms went on trial for the murders of Tony Tucker, Pat Tate, and Craig Rolfe. On January 20th, 1998, after 4.5 days of deliberations, the jury at the Old Bailey returned guilty verdicts for both men. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on mobile phone records that backed up parts of Nichols' story, a detail few questioned until long after the verdicts were handed down. Mick Steele and Jack Hooms were both sentenced to triple life terms. Darren Nichols was placed into the Witness Protection Program and given a new identity, along with protection for his family. Even now, Nichols says he lives in fear of retaliation for breaking the criminal code. At one point, there were rumors that a £250,000 bounty had been placed on his head. The dark history of the Rettendon Murders has always been tied to that blue Range Rover. But where is it now? Nearly 3 decades after Pat Tate, Tony Tucker, and Craig Rolfe were gunned down inside it, the infamous 1988 Range Rover Vogue SE has resurfaced, this time in the hands of a private collector. According to the Daily Star, it's now up for sale with an asking price of a jaw-dropping £100,000. Car collector Jake Hurst says he owns the vehicle. At first, he listed it for £15,000, admitting that the car creeps him out and still carries an unpleasant smell inside. Later, sensing the macabre interest, he bumped the price up to £100,000. The Range Rover had been released by police in 1998 and has passed through several owners since. It's officially listed as off-road now, its last MOT expiring way back in 2009. Despite Hurst's claims, not everyone is convinced it's the real deal. Skeptics point out how hard it would be to verify after all these years. Still, Hurst insists it's genuine and says he even keeps it parked with fake plates to deter theft. Whether it's authentic or not, one thing's for sure: the blue Range Rover remains a chilling relic from one of Britain's most infamous crime stories.